Have you ever felt like your life fell apart in a single moment? Like the ground beneath your feet just vanished? 1 second you had direction, structure, identity, and the next everything was gone. No safety, no certainty, no future you could even recognize. And if you have ever experienced a moment like that, then you already understand something very few people talk about. Destruction is not the end of the story. Sometimes it is the beginning of something darker and much more powerful. And to understand how deep this truth really goes, we must go back more than 400 years to a blood-soaked field in Japan in October of the year 1600, a place called Sekigahara, where on one single morning the fate of an entire nation would be decided in just 6 hours. And on that morning, a 17-year-old boy would lose everything he had ever known. His name was Miyamoto Musashi, a name that would later echo through history as the greatest swordsman Japan had ever produced, a man who fought more than 60 duels and never lost a single one. But before the legend, before the fame, before the mastery and the philosophy, he was just another soldier in a massive army. One side of the battlefield held nearly 80,000 men, and the other side stood another 80,000 men, samurai, archers, mounted warriors, infantry, the air heavy with fear, sweat, iron, and destiny. And the moment the battle began, it was as if the world itself had cracked open. Horses screaming, men screaming, blades clashing, arrows darkening the sky. And in only a few hours, tens of thousands of men were slaughtered, the ground turning into a mixture of dirt, blood, and broken hope, severed limbs, shattered armor, faces frozen in the final instant of terror. And as the sun began to fall, Musashi's side was completely destroyed. His army was massacred, his clan was wiped out, his commanders were dead, his future erased. And the worst part was not even that they were defeated. The worst part was that Musashi didn't die with honor alongside his brothers. He survived, he ran, he hid, he escaped. And in the samurai code, surviving in this way was a fate worse than death, because to live after your clan had fallen meant shame, dishonor, and social death. He was now a fugitive in his own country, hunted like a criminal by the victors, invisible to his own people. And in that moment, he was not a warrior, not a samurai, not even a respectable man. He was nothing. And imagine that for a moment. Being only 17 years old, everything you believed in being gone, everyone you knew being dead, the world wanting to erase you. Most people in that position fall into one of two directions. They either destroy themselves or they numb themselves. And in Japan at that time, both paths were common. Some remaining samurai committed ritual suicide to restore their honor. Others became wandering ronin, drunk, bitter, and broken, gambling and fighting their way to an early grave. That was the expected fate Musashi was supposed to accept, but he didn't. Instead, lost in the forests, starving, hunted, and terrified, something strange happened inside his mind. He stopped asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and replaced it with a different question, "What now?" And that single change marked the creation of his first rule: accept the brutal reality. Because acceptance is not weakness, it is a weapon. Most people think acceptance means giving up, but real acceptance is strategic. When a person experiences loss, failure, or heartbreak, they enter a mental war with reality. This shouldn't be happening. This is unfair. I don't deserve this. But while they fight what is doesn't change. Only their own energy is consumed. Musashi looked at the ruins of his life and did something most humans are incapable of. He didn't beg, he didn't cry for the world to go back to normal. He simply said, "This is real now. So what is my next move?" And in that moment, he reclaimed his power. Because when you stop fighting what has already happened, you can finally begin creating what will happen next. And modern psychology confirms this exact behavior. Researchers have proven that the people who recover from trauma the fastest are not those who suffer the least, but those who accept the new reality the fastest. Not because they like it, not because they approve of it, but because they stop resisting it. And once resistance ends, energy for action begins. And now think about your own life. What are you still fighting instead of accepting? A broken relationship, a mistake, a version of the past that can never return. Every ounce of resistance is an ounce of power stolen from your future. Musashi understood this and accepted something devastatingly simple. He accepted that he was nobody now, and that acceptance allowed him to ask the most powerful question of all: who can I become? But before he could answer that, he had to survive. And survival creates temptation, intense temptation. Because when a person is in pain, the mind seeks immediate relief in any form: comfort, distraction, numbness. And today that looks like alcohol, drugs, endless scrolling on a screen, junk food, meaningless relationships, video games. But in Musashi's world, that looked like sake addiction, gambling, sexual indulgence, becoming a criminal or a dishonorable mercenary. Most Ronin around him chose that easy path, drowning themselves in pleasure to escape reality. But Musashi chose something almost insane. He chose discipline in a world of chaos. While others searched for warmth, he slept outdoors. While others ate for comfort, he ate only enough to survive. While others wasted time, he trained for hour after hour. He practiced his sword, he meditated, he studied, he sharpened not just his blade, but his mind. And every single day, he fought his greatest enemy, himself. The urge to quit, the urge to run, the urge to numb the pain. And here is where ancient wisdom meets modern science, because neuroscience now shows that when human beings deal with pain through structure and challenge, they develop stronger neural pathways, stronger emotional control, and greater mental resilience, while those who constantly chase comfort actually weaken their ability to handle stress and deepen their anxiety and depression. In other words, comfort feels good temporarily, but it shrinks you. Discipline hurts momentarily, but it builds you into something powerful. And Musashi understood this without needing a laboratory or a scientist. So every time he said no to what was easy, he was saying yes to the version of himself that did not yet exist. And this is where most people fail, because they say, I am hurting, so I deserve relief. But the truth is, I am hurting, so I must become stronger. Pain is not an excuse to escape. It is a signal to evolve. And right now, there is something in your own life that you use to escape, something you use to numb yourself instead of growing. And that very thing is keeping you small. But even as Musashi hardened his body and disciplined his habits, another enemy was growing inside him, one far more dangerous than hunger or cold or loneliness: his emotions. Because emotion is fire. And if you let that fire take control, it burns everything. Years later, Musashi would face one of the most dangerous men in Japan, the legendary swordsman Sasaki Kojiro, on the island of Ganryujima. Kojiro was technically brilliant and wildly respected, but he was also filled with rage and hatred towards Musashi. And as he waited for Musashi to arrive, he paced, he fumed, he let emotion consume him completely. While Musashi arrived hours late, not in arrogance, but with purpose, completely calm, breathing slow and steady, his mind clear like still water. And in seconds, the duel was over. Kojiro fell. Not because he lacked skill, but because his emotions had blinded him. Anger destroyed his timing, ego distorted his perception, and Musashi's calm mind won the battle before the swords even touched. And science now explains what Musashi discovered by experience. When emotion rises, logical thinking collapses. The amygdala hijacks the prefrontal cortex, and you stop thinking clearly. You become reactive, impulsive, and short-sighted. And that is why people send messages they regret, make choices that destroy relationships, sabotage opportunities, and ruin their own future, because their feelings take control of the steering wheel. But Musashi created what he called the unshaken mind. He still felt fear and anger and sadness like any human, but he did not let those feelings command him. He observed them like passing clouds. He would pause, breathe, count to 10, and allow the emotional surge to pass before acting. Because emotion is like a wave. It rises, peaks, and disappears. And if you can ride that wave without drowning, you keep control. And imagine for a moment what your life would look like if your emotions no longer ruled your decisions, if you could feel without being controlled, if you could be angry without destroying your future, if you could be afraid without missing opportunities, if you could experience sadness without collapsing. You wouldn't be cold or robotic. You would be powerful, disciplined, and free. But mastering emotion created another challenge for Musashi: silence, isolation, and intense loneliness, because now he was truly alone with his thoughts. And that is where part 2 begins, because next, Musashi had to face the most dangerous enemy of all, his own mind looping in suffering. And he would discover the final and most powerful rules that would turn him from a broken survivor into a living legend.
After years of living as a wandering ronin, sleeping on hard ground, surviving on little food, training his body to exhaustion and his mind to silence, Musashi faced an enemy more dangerous than any swordsman, more subtle than hunger or cold, more destructive than fear itself. And that enemy was his own mind. Because the longer he lived alone, the more his thoughts began to circle around the same memory over and over again. The battlefield of Sekigahara, the screams of dying men, the moment his world collapsed. And he began replaying every possible version of the past in his head, asking, what if I had done this? What if I had chosen differently? What if I had stayed? What if I had died? What if the army had won? What if my clan still existed? And slowly this destructive loop started to poison him, not his body, but his soul. Because when a person's life breaks apart, it is natural for them to turn all their attention inward, focusing on their pain, their trauma, their losses, their identity, their disappointments. And this is where most people get trapped, because the mind becomes obsessed with the self, with me, my suffering, my injustice, my story, my past. And it goes in circles like a wolf trapped in its own mind. And the more you focus on that inner suffering, the bigger it becomes, the heavier it becomes, the more unbearable it becomes. And Musashi realized that no sword could defeat this enemy, no wandering could outrun it, and no discipline of the body alone could silence it. So he created the 4th rule of his mental code. Rule 4, stop being the center of the universe. Because he realized that obsession with the self is a prison. It shrinks the world down to only one story, your story, only one lens, your pain, only one problem, your life. But the world is infinitely bigger than that. And so instead of falling deeper into his own thoughts, Musashi made a radical, almost shocking decision. He forced his mind to move outward instead of inward. He began to study things that had nothing to do with his pain, nothing to do with his loss, nothing to do with his past. He studied philosophy, art, poetry, architecture, strategy, nature, calligraphy. He learned how to paint, how to sculpt, how to write, how to see the world through the eyes of thinkers, artists, and monks. He traveled through towns and villages, spoke with farmers, craftsmen, monks, philosophers, listening to the lives and stories of people completely different from him. And something extraordinary started to happen. The more his mind expanded into the world, the less trapped he felt inside himself. His suffering did not instantly vanish, but it began to shrink relative to the size of his new awareness. It was like standing too close to a wall and thinking it is the whole world, and then stepping back and realizing it is only one small part of something huge. Modern neuroscience explains exactly why this works. A University of Michigan study discovered that when people focus exclusively on their own problems, the brain repeatedly activates the same neural circuits responsible for depression and anxiety. But when the same people are forced to engage in new learning, new skills, and new perspectives, the brain creates new pathways, literally weakening the old suffering circuits and building healthier networks. The mind cannot stay stuck in a loop when it is challenged with something new and meaningful. And Musashi understood this without ever reading neuroscience. He just observed his own mind and understood that a small mind creates small problems, but an expanded mind creates expanded solutions. And so he developed a daily ritual to break the cycle of suffering. 1 hour every single day, he would study or practice something completely unrelated to how he felt. If he felt sad, he studied mathematics. If he felt angry, he practiced calligraphy. If he felt anxious, he observed nature. Because the purpose was not mastery, the purpose was escape from the prison of the self. Because your suffering, no matter how painful or real it is just one drop in the ocean of human experience. There are billions of people alive right now, millions of stories, thousands of years of knowledge, endless possibilities. And yet, when you are lost in pain, you shrink all of existence down to your own suffering. But Musashi refused to live in that small world. And as his mind expanded, his creativity expanded. His strategies became more unpredictable, his thinking sharper, his edge more refined. He became dangerous not just because of his sword, but because of his mind. But even after building discipline, emotional control, and expanded thinking, one of the most silent and poisonous enemies still crept into his heart: comparison. Because as he wandered through Japan, he saw other samurai who had survived, who still had clans, status, recognition, comfort, and a dark voice whispered in his mind, "Why them and not me? Why do they have everything and I have nothing? Why did suffering choose me?" And this envy began to corrode everything he had built. Because there will always be someone who has more than you, more wealth, more recognition, more love, more comfort. And if you allow comparison to dominate your thinking, then no level of success will ever satisfy you. And Musashi realized this after years of silent suffering. And so, he created Rule 5. Gratitude is not a feeling, it is a weapon. But not the fake, shallow gratitude people post on social media. Real, strategic gratitude. A deliberate rewiring of the mind. Instead of focusing on what he had lost, he forced himself to focus on what he still had. He had life, he had strength, he had freedom. No master, no restrictions. He had experience, he had knowledge. He had the opportunity to remake himself from nothing. And every day before sleep, he would write down 3 specific things he was grateful for. Not vague things like "I'm grateful for my life," but exact things like "I'm grateful that today my body endured 6 hours of training. I am grateful that today I learned a new way to hold my blade. I am grateful that today I watched the sunset and remembered I am still alive." And this practice was not spiritual, it was psychological. And modern science proves his wisdom. A University of California study split trauma survivors into 2 groups. One group spent 15 minutes a day thinking about what they lost. The other group spent 15 minutes a day thinking about what they still had. And after 1 month, their brains showed entirely different patterns. The first group had increased activity in the fear center of the brain, the amygdala, and a weakened rational center. But the second group showed stronger reasoning ability and increased levels of dopamine and serotonin, the chemicals responsible for motivation and well-being. Which means gratitude is not just emotional, it is chemical. It literally reprograms your brain to function better. And Musashi used it not just for inner peace, but as a weapon in battle. Because warriors who focus on what they could lose fight with fear. Warriors who focused on what they had to prove fight with ego. But Musashi fought focused on what he had already achieved, grateful to even be standing there. And that gratitude made him calm. And calm is more dangerous than rage. But there was one final truth Musashi understood that most humans never accept. Something so painful yet so freeing. Something that turned his tragedy into his greatest advantage. He realized he never needed to become the person he was before the Battle of Sekigahara. That person was gone, dead, buried in history. And trying to revive him would only trap Musashi in the past forever. So instead of asking, "How do I get my old life back?" he asked, "What new life can I create with the knowledge I now possess?" And this was his hidden 6th rule. Never try to resurrect your old self. Build a new one from the ashes. And this is the mistake most people make after trauma. They chase normal. They chase the past. They try to rebuild what was. But what was is gone. And sometimes what was actually a prison disguised as stability. Musashi understood that if Sekigahara had never happened, he would have lived and died as an ordinary samurai, one of thousands, remembered by no one. But because his world was destroyed, he was forced to evolve, forced to question everything, forced to go beyond what normal people ever reach. And that destruction created the legend. The writer of the Book of Five Rings, the undefeated swordsman, the warrior philosopher, the man studied by generals, CEOs, warriors, and thinkers hundreds of years later. And this applies to your life too. Maybe right now you are mourning the version of yourself that used to exist, the version with safety, identity, certainty, and routine. But what if that version was actually limiting you? What if that life was smaller than the one you are capable of creating now? What if this pain is not the end, but the beginning of your real self? Because real growth only happens under pressure. Diamonds are created under extreme pressure. Muscles grow when they are torn and rebuilt stronger. Character is forged in adversity. When life is easy, you stay the same. When life breaks you open, you are forced to evolve. And Musashi used the worst day of his life as fuel, not as an excuse. He used pain as pressure, loss as power, destruction as creation. And the 5 rules he discovered are now your map. 1. Accept reality without resistance. 2. Reject weakening pleasures. 3. Control emotions instead of obeying them. 4. Expand your mind beyond your own pain. And 5. Train yourself to see what you still have instead of what you lost. And here is the final challenge. Stop trying to repair your old life. Stop trying to go back. Stop trying to become who you were. That person survived one world, but you now need someone who can survive another. Use Musashi's rules not to go back in time, but to move forward into something you have never been. Because at the end of all this, there are only 2 directions. You can spend the rest of your life mourning the version of you that died, or you can spend the rest of your life building the version of you that is waiting to be born. And that choice belongs to you. But if you choose the second path, understand this: you are not alone. This path has been walked by warriors, thinkers, survivors, and legends throughout history, and now it is marked clearly in front of you. Your broken life is not a curse. It is an invitation. The question is whether you have the courage to accept it. Because on the other side of that courage is a version of you that is stronger, calmer, smarter, and more dangerous in the best way imaginable. And that version is waiting for you right now. The only thing left to decide is whether you will stay where you are or step forward into who you were truly meant to become. Miyamoto Musashi did not become a legend because his life was easy. He became a legend because it was destroyed. Because when everything he knew was taken from him, he refused to collapse. He refused to numb himself. He refused to become average. Instead, he stood in the ruins of his old life and chose to build something greater, stronger, wiser, and more dangerous in the best possible way. And that is the real lesson here. Your lowest moments are not proof that your story is over. They are proof that a new chapter has begun. Right now, you may feel lost, humiliated, rejected, confused, heartbroken, or defeated. But so was Musashi at 17, hunted, broke, and alone in a world that wanted him dead. And yet inside that broken boy was the future master, the philosopher, the warrior who would inspire the world centuries later. And inside you, there is also a version that has not yet been born, a version shaped by discipline, silence, perspective, control, and gratitude. But that version will never appear if you keep clinging to who you used to be. So stop trying to go backwards. Stop trying to fix what is already gone. Stop trying to become the person you were yesterday. Your job is not to resurrect the past. Your job is to create the future. To use the pain as pressure, the fear as fuel, the loss as training, and the chaos as the ground on which you build your new foundation. Because in the end, you will either be the person who says, "My life broke me," or the person who says, "My life rebuilt me." And the difference between those two stories is a decision you make every single day from this moment forward.